Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Her Song is a Sin, or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Lou1, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by me, Britt. Her Song is a Sin. Chapter 14. He had watched the angel fall from grace right before his very eyes, through the mask in the theater. He had seen the dirty things that the witch had made the blonde do. Once again she was using her workings and conjuring on another soul. What pain would she put this one through before she was tossed to the side? He was familiar with the pain that the bitch inflicted on others. He had hoped that this one would have been stronger than that. It disappointed him that this woman was just as weak as the others and would have to die. He would give her one final warning before taking action, but first he would drop off his presents. He took both gifts to a place that he knew that the siren had been. It was unlikely that she would be there when the presents were found, but she would find out about them, and she would wonder. She would know that they came from him. Massachusetts Gazette, Celebrity Column, October 16th, 2021. Cinemaphiles lucky enough to snag a seat on the first night of the annual Fever Dreams Festival at the Tarim Theater got a double feature of a treat. Not only did they get to see the newest film, Twisted Confessions, from the festival's artistic director, Bethany Treefine, but they also got the opportunity to see Siren Scylla Ramshorn and her new bodyguard rumored to be her secret girlfriend. The sexy Siren denied the rumors that dashing blonde was more than just the newest member of her staff. According to Mrs. Ramshorn, she was at the festival to support her longtime friend Treefine and promote her newest work. She hinted that she would soon be releasing a song inspired by the film. Mycroft Maxwell, managing director and host for the festival, commented that it was the best turnout that they had had in years and hoped to see many of the same artists and guests again in upcoming festivals. Those interested in seeing more of Scylla and her sibling Byron Ramshorn should get tickets while they last to the gallery exhibition opening at the Hague Gallery October 22nd, 2021. Although it is less than a week away, the title of the exhibition as well as its featured painting has been kept a closely guarded secret by the painter and the gallery. Raelle sat across from Scylla at the main house dining room, finishing her coffee after breakfast, when the comments in the celebrity section made the brew go bitter on her tongue. Denied rumors. She just put the paper down with a sigh when Parker shuffled into the room holding a cordless phone. Raelle had never seen a man walk that fast, and apparently neither had the musician, because she instantly looked up from her book with concern etched on her face. "Everything okay, Parker?" "I'm fine, ma'am," Parker said to Scylla with a smile. He looked over at Raelle and asked, "Miss Caller?" "Yes," Raelle asked. "Sorry to disturb you, ma'am, but you have a call. It's a Mrs. Craven from the FBI?" Raelle immediately looked down at her cell phone on the table and saw she had multiple missed calls from Tally. She furrowed her brows, wondering how she could have missed them. And then she realized she'd never turned her phone off of its silent setting after the festival the night before. She took the phone from Parker. "Tally?" "Raelle, you need to get here now. I'll text you the address." "Where are you?" Raelle asked. "The morgue." "What's happened, Tal?" Raelle asked, voice filled with dread. "We found the body from the photos." "Oh, God," Raelle groaned. "There's more, Ray." Raelle listened to Tally as she picked up her cell phone and looked at the address Tally had texted her. She calculated the distance and as soon as the redhead quit talking, said, I'll be there in an hour. Rael turned off the phone, handed it to Parker, and looked at the brunette. What's your schedule like today? Scylla quirked a brow. Why? Rael shook her head. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, cancel it. What? Scylla asked. Look, Syl, I don't have time to explain. Just don't go off the property until I get back. Rael stood up and placed a call to the internal security line on her cell as she walked out of the dining room and headed towards the front door of the mansion, the brunette trailing behind her. Get me Porter, Rael said to the voice that answered the line. She ended the call without further comment and put her phone in her pocket. Where are you going? Scylla asked. I need to meet my friend from the FBI. Porter met them just as they reached the front door. You needed something, Rael? Porter asked, smiling at the both of them. Rael looked at security guard for a long moment. He may not have been the smartest tool in the shed, but she believed he would try to keep Scylla safe. You know how to use a gun? Porter's eyes widened, as did Scylla's. He shot an odd look between the brunette and then looked back at Rael. After a few nervous swallows, he nodded and forced the words to come out. Yes, ma'am, I do. Rael reached into her pocket and handed him a key. That's to the case in the guest house. Find something that suits you and stick to Scylla until I get back. Porter nodded and hurried back out of the mansion. What's happened, Ray? Scylla asked, grabbing at the blonde's arm. Why are you giving Porter a gun? Why are you insisting that I stay in the house? Rael looked at Scylla. She didn't want to tell her what was going on, knowing it would frighten her, but she also felt things had become as bad as they were now because everyone had kept the musician in the dark. They found a body, Syl. One that looks a lot like the one in the photos that Psycho sent you. After a slight hesitation, she added, There's a second one, too. A second body? Scylla asked. She dropped her hand from Rael and took a step back. It was obvious she was having a difficult time accepting that there was even the first. Garrett kept insisting it was a hoax. It's not. I have to meet my FBI friend and go see it for myself. I shouldn't be gone more than a few hours. Rael turned to leave and Scylla called out, Ray, just get back here as soon as you can. Rael didn't turn back to the brunette, but she nodded at the door before she opened it. I will, Syl. Please just stay put. Rael pulled up to the oddly cheerful-looking building and parked her car. In the space beside her, a dark blue Dodge Charger idled, Tally behind the wheel. As the redhead turned her vehicle off and stepped out of the car, Rael did the same. I was worried about you, Ray. Why didn't you answer your phone? Despite the circumstances, Rael found herself smiling and blushing. How was with Scylla? With her or with her? Tally asked, as she playfully emphasized the second option, her eyes widening. Yeah, let's just say a lot has happened, Rael said, flashing her friend a sly grin. Tally looked like she wanted to jump up and down and squeal, and had they not been standing in the parking lot of a morgue, she would have done just that. Instead, she flashed the blonde a smile and said, Promise to tell me everything after this. Rael nodded, and together they walked into the building. The smell hit her like a smack in the face. You could have woke her up in the middle of the night, blindfolded her and drove her around in circles and then dropped her off inside a building, and she could immediately tell you if she was at a morgue. It didn't matter which one or in what country, they all smelled the same. Still death, thinly veiled by sickly sweet disinfectant. When they entered a room at the end of the hall, the medical examiner was already waiting for them. There were two gurneys side by side, and the handsome blonde-haired, green-eyed woman gave them a curt nod. Dr. Alice Monroe, this is Rael Collar. Alice gave the former military policeman turned private bodyguard a once-over and decided she didn't need to worry about cleaning up puke with this one. She could always tell who was going to be able to handle the horrors her house put on display under the industrial-strength lighting, and who would be depositing the remnants of their last meal on her clean floors. Nice to meet you, Rael. Sorry for the circumstances, Alice said. After Rael returned a greeting, she showed them to the supply closet. Despite all the preliminary investigations having been completed, she didn't allow anyone near a body that wasn't behind a screen in the viewing room without full gear. The bodies were usually so badly decomposed, the suits were just an attempt to preserve what was left of their remains and provide just a little assistance to dull the smell. Once they were suited and ready, the examiner walked over to one of the gurneys and lifted the sheet. Rael knew what to expect from the photos, but the photos didn't show the details. In person, the examiner had cleaned up the body. The eyes were still wide open, with a Y incision sewed into the chest. The body was so disordered from where it once was in the photos. It was difficult to imagine this figure was the same person in the photos that was in the envelope left on the limo and Byron took to the house. Through the disfigurement, she saw the features of the face that matched the singer's. The piercing blue eyes that once mirrored Scylla's were now painted over with a milky film. She had been chosen merely because of her resemblance to the singer, and it made Ray shudder to think what he would do to the actual Scylla Ramshorn. Alice didn't give her much time to just look, and instead began going over various slashes and cuts of the body. Rael had to drag her eyes away from the word sexy that had been carved into the woman's chest. So all of this was done with an estimated 5 to 6 inch serrated blade, like a large hunting knife. Then the gunshot to the head was the finishing move? Rael asked, leaning forward to examine the entrance wound at the girl's temple. Yes, Alice confirmed, looking down at the jagged cuts on the woman's chest. The killer wanted to make it as painful as possible before she met her end. Rael looked at the angry wounds across the chest. There was something intimate and purposeful about it, but also chaotic. This person had been in a rage, but then calmly delivered a kill shot. They missed cutting anything vital, Tally noted. They wanted to take their time with her until they were ready to kill her, Rael said. And she was sexually assaulted? Tally asked. We ran a kit and it showed there was trauma, and it was inflicted post-mortem, Alice answered. Thank the goddess, Tally said as she examined the wounds. They moved on to the second body, and this time Rael wasn't able to hold back her reaction. As the sheet was fully removed, she could see 2 stumps where the women's feet should be. Looking at Tally, she asked, Where's the feet? Shaking her head, Tally answered. They haven't been recovered. Right, Rael muttered. The wounds on the second victim were nearly the same as the first, save the word naughty instead of sexy carved into the chest and the missing feet. Alice was generous with her time and spent most of her morning with them answering questions and discussing theories. Some tests were still out to the labs, and she warned with a backlog that it might take a few days for her to get back to them. It was inevitable. The medical examiner expected something in return for her time. Looking at Rael, she asked, So, still a Ramshorn? Rael met Alice's gaze with a well-rehearsed, expressionless face. Oh, come on. The song? Sexy, naughty, bitchy? I'm missing a corpse, aren't I? No comment, Rael answered. Alice rolled her eyes until he came to her rescue. Ray, Alice is good friends with Alder. We chose her personally to be involved. She can be discreet. Okay, Rael answered. As far as the third body, yeah, that's a working theory. Well, I hope for the sake of future victims, let's hope the person doing this doesn't move on to her newer music. Yeah, Telly answered solemnly, not wanting to think of the potential horrors if that was to happen. Rael's brow quirked as she looked at the woman in question. Burning witches? Alice furnished. Rael thought about the doll at the Beltane and shuddered. We need to stop this. Agreed, Telly confirmed. They doffed their gear and washed their hands at one of the industrial sinks. Alice met them on the other side of the double doors and pulled out a card, wrote her cell number on it, and handed it to Rael. Call me if you are ever in town with some free time and we can do lunch? Tally looked over at Rael and bit back a laugh. Thanks, Rael said as she took the card from Alice and slipped it into the pocket of her Columbia windbreaker. After receiving copies of the victims' preliminary autopsy reports, Rael and Tally made their way out of the morgue, and Rael took in a deep breath of the fresh air. So, lunch? Tally said, laughing at her friend. Yeah, Rael answered. Lunch. The two friends decided to have lunch at the same cafe that they had dined at before with Abigail, and after Rael finished her sandwich, she asked, "Hey, Tell, why am I getting all this help from the FBI?" Telly shrugged. "The Ramshorn name is well known. You know her dad was in the government. Lots of people still want to protect her by proxy, not to mention she's got a huge fan base of her own." Rael shook her head. "Politics and show business. What a silly job I'm doing." The redhead laughed and looked at her friend. "Okay, Ray. I let you eat. Now tell me the truth about the rumors I've been reading about in the papers." Rael smiled, but the expression didn't quite meet her eyes. "I don't know, Tally." Tally met the pale blue eyes of her friend. "Come on, Ray. I know that you're crazy about her." "I am," Rael admitted. "And I did exactly what I was afraid that I'd do. I got involved with her, and now I can't tell when to be her bodyguard and when to be her lover." Tally thought for a moment. Her brows furrowed, and then she answered, "Maybe you just do both all the time." "And what about when she wants to do something that's not really safe or smart?" "Then you tell her no?" Telly said, her response coming out more as a question than an answer. Rael blushed. "And what if I don't want to say no?" Telly's eyes widened and she smiled. "Why do I think there's a story here?" After Rael gave Tally the broad strokes of the theater festival opening, Tally sat across from her friend for several minutes and sipped the spiced cider they had ordered. She'd known Rael since basic, and she knew that although the blonde certainly had enjoyed the company of women, she'd never known her to be reckless. "Ray, I know you can be, well, I know you like women." "You mean I like sex?" "Right," Telly answered, blushing. "But goddess, Ray, in public? And while you were working? That's not like you." Rael shook her head. "I know." She sighed and took a sip of her cider. "That's what I mean. There's something about her. She could suggest jumping off of a cliff, and I'd probably go out and buy a parachute." "Well, at least you'd get a parachute," Telly said. "See, there's that. You're still thinking with at least part of your brain." Rael laughed. "God, Tell, I think I'm in trouble." "You mean you think you're falling in love?" Telly surmised. "Yeah," Rael admitted, as much to her friend as to herself. "So have you talked to her about it?" "No, and see, that's the thing. We are constantly with each other, but we never get alone time to talk about anything private. And when we do get time, we end up fucking like bunnies." Telly's face matched her hair for several seconds, and she ducked behind her cider. "It was like that, with you-know-who at first, too." Rael's brow quirked, and she seized at the chance to get the spotlight off her drama. "Oh, and how is it going with your Lady Voldemort?" Telly laughed at Rael's impromptu code name for Sarah Alder. "It's going really good. I think I'm going to ask for that transfer after this case, though." "Why?" Rael asked, though she already suspected she knew the answer. "It's just too hard to keep it on the wraps. We want to be out and about. It sucks having to sneak around all the time." The blonde nodded and ducked behind her own cup of cider. "Yeah, I get that." Rael did get how Telly was feeling. She didn't want to be a denied rumor. She wanted to be Scylla's girlfriend. But she wondered if that was what Scylla wanted. Rael had asked Scylla to take care of the media stuff, and the brunette had said that she would. Overthinking as she tended to do, she continued, with the denial just for the media's sake? If so, then why hadn't they taken the time to really talk about what was happening between them? Once they finished their drinks, Rael accompanied Tally back to the FBI office, where they met with Alder and a couple of other agents assigned to the case. Everyone took their seats at the rectangular table. At the head of the table stood Alder, waiting for everyone to get settled. Of course, Tally had found her and Ray a seat closer to the head of the table. "Okay, people," Alder began. "We all know that this started with Miss Scylla Ramshorn receiving letters at her home." "Yes, but she never saw them," Rael said. "That's what the publicist claimed?" A red-haired agent in his early 30s asked almost directly across from where Ray and Tally were sitting. Rael could see his identity card read Trevor McIntosh. "Correct," Rael answered. Garrett Buttonwood claims that he threw the first couple of letters in the trash without reporting to anyone else, staff or otherwise. Then, according to our timeline, the doll comes next, Tally said. Scylla Ramshorn's brother found the doll inside the house, and that's what prompted Miss Ramshorn's manager to seek out a private bodyguard. She nodded to Ray as her cue to take over. Right. But before I was actually hired, they found another note. And that's what really freaked them out. That was the one with the pictures, right? The 40-something dark-haired FBI agent looked up from his note-taking, unable to see his badge since he was at the furthest seat possible. She thought his name was John. Some color? Black? John Black? Still unsure of the agent's name, she responded with a simple correct. And it was on the limo. Rael nodded. Then the doll at Beltane, Alder asked. Now we have bodies, the Macintosh said. Jane Doe was found in a dumpster outside of Tony's this morning, Telly said. They looked at the photo of the body. But the pictures sent show her in a grave, Black protested. So what, he dug her up and dumped her at the restaurant? Why? Alder nodded. That's what the forensics suggest. The pictures weren't enough, Rael said. They didn't get the reaction from Scylla that the killer was wanting. I agree, Miss Collar, Alder said. It's obvious that the person doing this is attempting to get Mrs. Ramshorn's attention. As Alder continued, she shot a glance over to Tally, who ducked her head. And the second body? Macintosh said. It was just dumped? Yes, Tally said. Forensics suggest that the body was dumped directly from the place of death to the dumpsters outside of Zupa's. Rael shook her head. Zupa's was the Italian restaurant that she had taken Scylla to for their second date. Right, and both bodies have words carved into their chests that come from Mrs. Ramshorn's song, Sexy, Naughty, Bitchy? Macintosh asked. Right, Black said, laughing. I hear that describes Scylla Ramshorn to a T. Well, she is sexy as hell, Macintosh admitted. Yeah, and according to the people we've interviewed, an entitled little bitch, Black added. Rael's jaw clenched. A lot of that is an act. Yeah, well, she's a good actress then, Macintosh said. Actually, she is, Telly said in defense of Scylla. She's up for several awards. Alder watched the exchange for as long as she could stand. She glanced at Tally and then said, Let's get back to the situation at hand. Rael nodded. What have we learned about the victims? Well, Jane Doe we can assume was a prostitute. She's got several of the usual indicators, and her system was filled with marijuana, MDMA, and some sort of hallucinogens, Black said. The second, Tally said looking at her notes, has been identified by dental records as a Penelope Silver. She was a second-year law student. Drugs were also in her system, identical ones, in fact, Macintosh said. So, does she have a history of using, or was she drugged by the killer? Rael asked. Tox screens are still processing on what was actually in her system, and we are still investigating and looking at the usual forensic data, financial, social media, cell phone, to see if there was a history of drug use, Tally answered. And we will need to meet with her friends. Her parents say she didn't use drugs, but then parents usually do. Tally looked pointedly at Alder. The action made Rael's brow quirk. Throughout their discussions and rehashing of the evidence and timeline, Tally and Alder kept sneaking glances at one another, and Rael decided that after the third time catching them, they weren't just making googly eyes at one another. Something else was going on. Finally, she asked, Okay, what is it you're not wanting to tell me? Rael asked. Alder wants to interrogate Scylla, Tally immediately blurted out. Rael's eyes furrowed, and she looked at Alder. Scylla's the victim here. Actually, Miss Collar, Alder said, her voice as smooth as silk, these women are. She gestured to the photo of the dead women on the evidence board. Yes, and so is she, Rael said, pointing to the large photo of Scylla that seemed to be on the wrong section of the board. Her focus was on the meeting, and distracted by the siren, Ray finally noticed the labels on the board. Why is she under the suspect list? Sarah thinks that there's something Scylla is hiding. Thank you, Agent Craven, Alder said, her voice a warning. Ma'am, Tally said instantly, realizing her slip as Macintosh and Black looked up from their styrofoam cups of coffee. Rael noticed their reaction, and she felt bad for her friend. She could understand why Tally wanted a transfer. Getting back to the topic, her focus on protecting Scylla, she said, "Well, if you go in there acting like she's a suspect, she'll never tell you a thing. I understand that you have become close with Miss Ramshorn during the course of your duties. Has she told you anything about her past that might help us?" Alder asked. "No," Raelle admitted. "Then I think it is time for a meeting with Miss Ramshorn. Perhaps you could facilitate it?" Raelle nodded. "Maybe. I can ask." "We could meet you at the mansion," Tally suggested. Alder nodded. "If she's agreeable, we could do the interrogation there." "I'll try," Raelle answered. She knew that Ramshorn didn't like people on her property, and it would be a hard sell. Still, the alternative of being marched into FBI headquarters may make the brunette agreeable. "Get her to say yes, Miss Caller, or I'll be forced to make her come here." Raelle swallowed and nodded. "I don't understand why you're doing this," Byron said from the couch. Beside him, Scylla shook her head. "Raelle told me she couldn't do the job with the aggravation of the press." Across from them, Isadora and Garrett sat on the other couch. Garrett had insisted on calling the impromptu meeting after reading the celebrity gossip of the day. Byron frowned. "But you like each other. You've been on dates. You're obviously together." "Are we?" Scylla asked. Neither had gotten the opportunity to discuss exactly what they were to one another. Garrett shook his head. "The Advocate comes out in a few days. It would be great if you'd announced that you're together right after." "No," Scylla said, her voice final. "Then you're going to have to get a girlfriend." "She has one, Garrett," Isadora said. "Not a public one," Garrett said. He looked at the brunette. "We need someone that's got a bit of a reputation. Otherwise, no one would believe it." The publicist thought for a moment and then nodded at Scylla. "Yeah, on second thought, Raelle's a bad idea. She comes off as way too tame." Scylla couldn't resist a smirk. If only the publicist knew. "That's a terrible idea, Syl." Byron shook his head. "You'll end up ruining your chances with Raelle." Garrett shrugged. "Well, the other alternative is to pretend to play the field." Scylla shook her head. "I'm not doing anything until I can talk to Raelle about all of this." "Talk fast," Garrett said. "The news changes daily." Byron looked at his sister. "I have to agree with Garrett on that one. You need to talk to Raelle sooner than later." "What's going on?" Raelle asked as she hopped out of her car later that evening. "Why did I get a call on the security line?" "There's a package that arrived. It had Sella's name in block letters just like those notes. Roberts went out to the guard shack this evening and it was just sitting there." Porter answered as he approached Raelle's car. "Who had the previous shift?" Raelle asked. "She'd fire whoever let it by them." "Me," Porter admitted. Raelle's jaw clenched. He was the one person she couldn't fire. Before she could speak, Porter shook his head. "Look, you asked me to stick to Scylla, and I did. I forgot to change the schedule, and by the time I remembered no one I called could cover the shift. I fucked up. Again." "Porter, what the hell?" She shook her head and sighed. "Did the cameras capture it, at least?" "Yeah, though it doesn't really tell us anything." "What do you mean?" "It was just a kid. He was on a bike, and he rode right up to the gate and put it down. Then he rode away." "Did you call the local police? Maybe they can use the security camera footage to track down the kid." "Yeah, I called them and gave them the footage of one of those little things." "An SD card?" "Yeah," Porter said. "Was that okay?" "Yes, Porter. That was good." "Good," Porter said, his chest puffing at the compliment. "I thought about waiting until you called back, but then I figured that if I went ahead and gave it to them, they might have answers by the time you got here." "That was great, Porter," Raelle answered. "Do they?" "No. I haven't heard back from them." "Okay, well, give it a couple of hours and try again." "So where is it?" "Where's what?" the porter asked. Raelle resisted lashing out at the man, but just barely. Deliberately, she said, "The package." "Oh," Porter answered. "It's in the house." "What?" Raelle asked, her voice a shout. Porter cowered slightly and pointed toward the house. "Helen said she was going in for coffee and offered to take it inside for me." "Fucking hell!" Raelle yelled and marched toward the house, the larger man practically running to keep up with the bodyguard. Inside the house, she broke up whatever little private meeting Scylla was having with her crew in one of the living rooms and gathered them all around the box she had Porter to go get. "Who touched this?" "Well, I did," Porter said, and then smiled sheepishly. "But you know that." "And I offered to carry it into the house," Helen admitted. "You know that, too." "I put it in Scylla's room," Isadora added, finally providing the blonde with new information, "because I assumed since Helen brought it over, it was safe." The manager glanced the unspoken accusation at Helen, but the groundskeeper just shrugged. Raelle stood there, mouth gaping. She could feel her temper flare. "Is there anyone here who hasn't fucking touched it?" "I didn't," Garrett said. Raelle whirled around and stared at the smug-looking publicist. Who would have thought the fucking publicist would be the one to get the gold star? They all stared at the innocent enough-looking box sitting on the coffee table. Raelle asked Porter to go to the guest house and get one of her kits as he returned a few minutes later with a small bag. Raelle reached inside, getting what she needed. She snapped on a pair of vinyl evidence gloves, pulled out a stethoscope. After putting it on, she ran it slowly over the box as she listened for the sound of ticking. Hearing none, she put the stethoscope aside and grabbed a knife, carefully, so that she would do as little damage as possible to any potential fingerprints. She cut the tape and opened the box. Everyone in the room subconsciously leaned forward, including Scylla, who was standing beside Raelle with her arms folded in front of her. Raelle looked up and met the azure eyes. Scylla quirked a brow, and the blonde reached inside the box and pulled out the contents. There were 2 notes and 2 dolls. "How fucking cute," Raelle muttered, gingerly picking up the 2 dolls tied to each other and turning them over in her hand. One doll looked just like the other ones that had been sent before, while the second was of a blonde with blue eyes. There was even a little toy gun attached to the doll's belt. Raelle resisted commenting and moved her attention to the notes. They were of a similar style. Block letters talking about the death of the witch. The second note was intended for her. She read the warning and shook her head. She put everything back in the box, took off her gloves, and sighed. "Okay, show's over," Raelle said. As everyone began to file out of the living area, Raelle called out to the brunette. "Scylla, can we talk for a minute?" Scylla quirked a brow and took a seat on the couch beside her bodyguard. "You were gone a long time." "Yeah," Raelle answered. "Lots to do. Garrett wasn't happy that I blew off a couple of interviews today." Raelle snorted. "I'm sure he'll blame it on me again. It's not like I'm just trying to keep you alive." Scylla looked at her bodyguard for a moment. "So you're just trying to keep me alive, huh?" Raelle shook her head. "That's not what I meant. I mean when I asked you to cancel." "It's fine, Raelle," Scylla said. The brunette wanted to talk to Raelle, but once again her schedule was getting in the way. "What did you want? I need to get ready. Garrett's making me do a podcast interview this evening." Scylla?" Raelle began. Scylla looked over at the blonde, eyes searching. She was wondering if Raelle was finally going to bring up the subject they'd been dancing around. The musician had wanted to for a while, but every time she got the chance, she chickened out and had defaulted to her normal seductions. "What?" "The FBI wants to talk to you about what they found." Scylla's brow furrowed, and she allowed indifference to hide disappointment. "I don't know anything about it." "They still want to talk to you, to see if you know something that might help us figure out who's doing this." Scylla shook her head. "I told you before I don't have a clue. No one I know would do this." "I've told them that. They want to hear it from you." "No," Scylla said and shook her head. Raelle's brows furrowed. She couldn't understand why Scylla was being so resistant. "Look, they're trying to help me keep you safe. And you are doing just fine. Look, Scylla, you don't really get to say no to this. You can do it here on your terms, or they can drag you to their office." "And you'd let them do that to me?" Scylla asked, surprised. "I don't have any authority to stop them," Raelle admitted. Scylla pursed her lips and Raelle pressed on. "Please, Syl. Agent Craven is my friend and her partner is the agent in charge. They can be discreet. They can come here and everyone will think that they're just visiting me." Scylla sighed. "Fine. Find a hole in my schedule and I'll meet with them." "Well?" Telly asked as soon as she picked up the phone. She stood in Sarah's kitchen, making a salad while the older woman stirred some sort of pasta dish on the stove. She looked adorable in her kiss-the-chef apron. She said yes to the interview, Rael said, her voice breaking Tally's daydream of what she wanted to do with the woman under the apron. Good, Tally said. Rael snorted. Yeah, it wasn't easy. I had to ensure her that it would look like you were just coming over to visit me. We can do that, Tally said. She'd convince Alder somehow. Listen, Tally. She got another package while I was gone. It was a box that had 2 dolls and a couple of notes. 2 dolls? Tally said. Because of 2 bodies? No. One of the dolls looked like me, and the note was basically about me backing off of her. Shit, Rael, that's not good. I know, Rael agreed. Worried what this could mean for Scylla. Would it take some of the focus off of her, or make the killer enraged because Rael had Scylla's attention and the killer did not? I'll send it over to the FBI office first thing in the morning. Finishing the salad, Tally moved over to the wine cabinet and selected a wine to go with the meal. As she opened it to let it breathe, she asked, Good. So what about the other stuff? Have you had that talk yet? No, Rael admitted. She was busy doing another interview. That's all her publicist has her doing nowadays. Well, maybe you should forgo the cliff edge until you do. Is that what worked for you? Tally watched Alder fix their plates and take them over to the dining table. She grabbed the bottle of wine and 2 glasses and joined her partner. Something like that. Rael laughed. Yeah, I'm already too close to the edge. I'll see you 2 in a few days. Bye, Ray. When Tally ended the call, Alder looked up at her and smiled. She agreed to the interview? Tally nodded. Reluctantly, according to Rael. Alder took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I hope that she is cooperative with the investigation. Tally picked up a fork and frowned. Do you really think keeping knowledge of those sealed files from Rael was a good idea? Sarah's brow quirked. If she's really as close to Scylla as you say she is, I'm afraid she might tip the brunette off, if not to warn her, to satisfy her own curiosity. I want to surprise Miss Ramshorn with the information when the time is right. Tally nodded. I just hope Ray doesn't end up getting hurt in all of this, and I don't like keeping things from her. Sarah took a sip of her wine and looked at her young lover. I hope no one else ends up getting hurt. If it helps ease your conscience, think of it as a direct order from your supervisor. Yes, ma'am, Tally answered. Sarah smiled and picked up her fork. Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.